I'm a great fan of Chinese silent cinema. I think it's one of the best kept secrets in world cultural history. It's amazing how little people know about it. But starting in the 1920s and by the mid-1920s, it's really rolling very fast. By the early 30s, it's just world-class cinema, and it's a pity more people don't know about it. That's one of the reasons I do research on it. And so they're fully aware of British and American traditions of filmmaking. Those films can be seen in Shanghai, and the filmmakers in China had seen those films. But it's still a different setting. China is undergoing a big transition after the 1911 revolution, and the big question is what's next? And one of the things I like about the cinema is that it engages in what I call a national allegory. So typically these films are about families or two or three individuals and their relationship. And so you can take it at that level, but I think the people in the audience are seeing more than that. They're seeing that this is somehow connected to social and cultural issues that they're talking about every day. Because one of the things that's going on in China at this time, in urban China mainly, in the 20s, mid-20s, late 20s, early 1930s, is they're grappling with cultural modernity. So that means in everyday life, in personal relationships, in all sorts of ways. They're grappling with what I call cultural modernity. And people in the urban sector want modernity, but they don't know quite what it is, or they don't appreciate enough that there's a big debate about this. And this is true even in Europe. It happened in France, it happened in London, it happened in New York. People wanted modernity, but there was a big struggle about what it was. What are the proper relationships between men and women, for example, in a modern cultural situation? And a lot of these films deal with those issues, and they're hot issues. And in some ways, I think what's happening, more so in Chinese silent cinema than in, let's say, American silent cinema, is the audience, which is typically a middle-class audience because you still have to pay for a ticket. The audience is being confronted. The audience is being told, we have this issue, we have that issue, and there's a debate about it. We don't know what the exact answer is yet. So you see the people on screen acting out these, so for example, I'll give you one example that's really powerful. It's what I call the modern marriage. So in the urban sector, young people, almost all of them want the modern marriage, but nobody knows what it is. And so they experiment with different kinds of forms. Maybe it's this way, maybe it's that way. And in doing so, problems arise and sometimes very painful situations evolve. So that's what I say about Chinese silent era filmmaking is in its own way very confrontational. It's not just light entertainment, let's have a meal, go see a film and then go home. No, people are discussing it and talking about it in the way out. And it's being written about in the newspapers as well. So film criticism involves the same kinds of issues. This is one of my favorites. This is a brilliant piece of work by global standards. It's a magnificent piece of work. Wu Yonggang was a great director. Ran Ningyu was the best actress. I knew people many years ago when I was living in China, I knew people who knew her, and her life was extremely problematic. She was hounded by the tabloid press, and of course, as many people know, she ended up committing suicide at a very young age. But she made so many pictures, and Shen Nu was probably, the goddess was probably the best known one. And if people haven't seen it, your listeners haven't seen it, find a way to see this film. It's available on YouTube. You just click on and you can see the whole film in a beautiful edition. So what's interesting about it? She plays the role of a prostitute from the opening of the movie to the very end. Then we feel very uneasy about this prostitute, but the film is called Goddess. So what is she? I'm confused already. Is she a nasty, dirty person, or is she some kind of saintly person? And so the director is confronting you, the middle-class audience. And it's basically, what happens in the film is she emerges as an incredibly proactive, heroic person because she has a son to take care of and to see that he has a good life. Some of the middle-class people we see in the film, in the neighborhood, who shun her, who shun the boy, they come off as being very ugly. And she comes off as being, as I said before, very saintly. And so it's challenging people in their views that they have about different kinds of people in society. And in some ways, it's flipping the roles. So she's a prostitute, but she's a very good person. And then the middle-class people who we think of, oh, very nice people, no, they're very nasty, mean, ugly people. This film, like many of the films, silent era films, challenge the audience. It challenges them to rethink the ideas that they have about all sorts of social issues. And the acting in this particular one is absolutely brilliant. So I recommend that film to everybody. Yes, I'm a big fan of interdisciplinary studies. Some people think I'm an historian, some people think I'm a political scientist, some think I'm a sociologist. You know, I've never bothered to pin myself down in one of those categories. I think that use whatever methods and methodologies are available to you. Be fluid, be relaxed about it. And to me, because I was trained in graduate school at a time when there was no access to China, my mentors had never been to China. I couldn't imagine I might ever have an opportunity to actually visit China when I was a graduate student. And so we tended to do subjects like intellectual history because you could do them from a library. You didn't need access to China to do intellectual history. People studied Liang Qiqiao, Yan Fu, this kind of subject. But of course, if I was studying Germany, I would want to be in Germany. If I was studying Egypt, I would want to be in Egypt, have access. So I had that feeling about China, and I was very lucky that very early in 1971, in the middle of the Cultural Revolution, I had my first chance to visit China. And ever since then, I've been coming back time and time again. And so my advice to students is to get out there. I mean, this is a wonderful institution, but get out into the city, get out into the other parts of China and talk to people. So I emphasize language study. Nothing is more important than language study. The better your language skills, the more chance you have to make contact with people. And one of the things that I got involved in rather heavily early on, starting in the late 1970s, is field research. So in 1978, two colleagues and I were the first American university-based scholars to get research access to a village, to do a village study. And we ended up doing 2 books and repeated visits back to the village time and again. And it was just fascinating, interviewing. I love to interview ordinary people about their life experience. And just, sometimes you have to keep your mouth shut, just listen to what they're saying, and you can learn from what I call oral histories. I urge everyone to try it. Sometimes just here in Beijing, go and buy a tube of toothpaste somewhere and talk to the people, in the shop about what's going on and, how they're doing and where they're from and this kind of thing. So oral histories are very important. We call this grassroots research, that, we all are interested in what's happening at the highest levels of power in every country. But increasingly over the years, I've been asking the question, okay, what's happening at the base of society? How is life experienced by ordinary people? And you talk to them and listen. And then I got very interested in the possibility of not just talking and listening, but filming people. So I got involved in documentary filmmaking, and this involved interviewing people on a whole range of subjects, grassroots people, ordinary people, but filming interviews of them and their experiences. It was some of the most rewarding work I ever did. Very, very compelling. And I found that I learned things that I couldn't learn from books. And the same thing about my interest in cinema. I felt that studying the history of Chinese filmmaking, I was learning something from what I call visual sources. So there are all kinds of sources. And for many years, we neglected research on visual sources, including cinema. And so my question is always, what can we learn from visual sources that we can't learn from other sources? How do we unpack them and take things away that we can't get from other sources? I've always said no source is perfect. All sources have their weaknesses. All sources have their strength. But we had ignored both this kind of grassroots oral history, interviewing strategy, and also paying attention to visual sources. So I urge students to experiment, try different methods. Nothing wrong with reading books and doing archive work in libraries. That's very good too. But I've always liked the personal touch, and that's why I enjoy world traveling. I enjoy going to different countries where I know nothing, and I try to learn when I'm present.